The World Health Organization 2025 Pandemic Treaty. We consider in this interview the impact on traditional African medicine. The discussion will be on a vote that was taken very recently at the United Nations to agree the 2025 Pandemic Treaty. So it's been approved at the United Nations, but yet to be ratified by the individual countries who are signatories to that treaty, where you create national laws and approve. And once approved, it becomes international law. But how many of you were aware that these discussions were underway? How many of you who were listening to this particular podcast contributed to the consultation, the dialogue over the articles contained in this treaty? How many of you have read the treaty? How many of you agree with its content? How many of you who have read the treaty but are concerned about a supernatural agency, that is the World Health Organization, being able to impose its will on your health services? How many of you are comfortable with this? These are important questions to ask. But the more important question, if I may, and I'm going to take it, and this is purely for an example from an African perspective, because this will relate to India, to China, to Russia, and to other great ethnicities. But today we'll look at it via the lens of an African perspective and review the articles and consider its implications for Africa. I wish to encourage this dialogue across Asia, the Americas, and beyond. For it's important for the people to understand the implications of this treaty. I want to make it clear, though, the treaty does contain some quite interesting articles that generally common sense says we should approve. But the treaty is expensive. Okay, it's expensive. Because it does require, and it's not been too good of late, those with the greatest wealth to make a real contribution to those with less wealth and less control over the technology to share that wealth, to share the technology with those who have less. Yep. Okay. Yes, indeed. I can hear you. I heard you. We as a species are pretty strange. Yep. This species, the human species, we're pretty strange. I'm pretty sure that if an alien were to come in and observe our behavior, they would have to question our sanity. How is it possible we have a single species that dominates the planet and is capable of space travel, yet can still behave in barbaric manners, in a barbaric way, against fellow members of the same species? We're but one human race, one human species. Many ethnicities, that's true. Yep, different parts of the world. Yep, that's fine. But we're one human race, one species. We are a single genetic pool. The entire species pool is important for our long-term survival as a species, as a human race. The ethnicities are simply regional adaptations, nothing else. My pigmentation, my melanin, it's a regional adaptation. Yeah. If I spent maybe 100,000 years, my family spent 100,000 years in the Caucasus, I'd have less melanin, could be less required to protect myself from the sun's ray. Yeah. That's it. That's the difference. It's very superficial, actually. It's 0.0000001% of a single percent, which is why we're able to mate regardless of where we are on the globe, because we are a single family. So I'm sure an alien would question our sanity. But this treaty offers some hope, despite the fact the country, United States of America, is attempting to withdraw itself from these supranational agencies that bring the whole world together so we work in common aim and common purpose. Yes, America is going through a very strange phase. But I'm sure America and Americans will wake up, that you are an integral part of the global family. And if you have great wealth, you have a responsibility to use that great wealth for the common good. Don't want to take it from you, but if you have so much wealth that you cannot spend it in your lifetimes, then, well, again, a alien observing this would think we consider us quite strange. Because the alien will see us as a single species. This alien will not recognize the ethnicities, yeah, because they're superficial differences. I know for some those words are astonishing. Mhm. And your ethnicity is a powerful determinant of who you are as a human being. It is true. It is true. But we still belong to a human family. We have a common ancestry, yep, that came out of Africa, yep, yep. We have a common thread, yep, throughout the world that leads to a single place. We are but one single family. And I look forward to that family working together in common aim and common purpose. But today, we want to review the 2025 Pandemic Treaty. Be ready for what will be an inspirational experience. Here we go. Success first time, I believe. Good morning, sir. Can you hear us?
Hey, good morning, my brother. How you doing?
I am so well. It's good to see your face again and your inspired persona. Okay, the aura around you is magnificent. The aura around you is magnificent. Okay, we're going to go right into this because there's much to
Thank you.
pack into this. And I know you very well. I'm going to ask you, please, just to say your name, the organization you represent, okay, and you'll just humble me, okay, because I've got a very anglicized name, okay. Just for the benefit of the audience, explain the meanings of your name. So the name, begin with your name, the organization, explain the meaning of your birth name. Please go ahead. Go ahead.
Thank you so much, my brother. Well, I am Sabelo Sbanda. The organization that I represent is called the International Alliance of Loctivists.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm based in Cape Town, as you've already indicated.
Mm-hmm.
The name Sabelo
Mm-hmm.
basically means gift. So what I was saying, my brother, is that the name Sabelo means gift, which also basically means an allocation. And I like to consider myself
Mm-hmm.
a gift to humanity. And that's why I
Yes.
do the work that I do. And
Mm-hmm.
in saying that, Sbanda, basically our praise names is Otautu Vodloza Umshatonga Shilwatambo Umakoba, because our
Okay.
totem is lion. So now if you see on my WhatsApp it says Onga Shilwatambo, that basically means the one who is not defeated by any bone, the bone crusher, Uvodloza, the
Oh,
one who
yes.
to any situation and will fight through
Yes.
to the end, basically, because the lion never give up. The lion
That's
never
right.
give up. We just fight through all the way. So that's who I am, my brother. And the
Yes.
Loctivist,
Mm-hmm.
by virtue of the
Please.
fact that I'm a lawyer and also an activist, I therefore
Mm-hmm.
coined the word Loctivist. And
Uh-huh.
now, basically, the people refer to me as the People's Loctivist
Okay.
because that is who I am. I fight for the rights of the people. I have taken it to myself that by
Mm-hmm.
virtue of the fact that I'm a lawyer, I have to
Yes.
use the law for the betterment of humanity. Just like you were
Absolutely.
talking earlier about the importance of humanity, that
Yes. Yes.
people have to use their giftings as God gave them for
Yes.
purposes of advancing the interests of humanity. And that's one
Absolutely.
of the reasons why we're so concerned about this treaty
Okay.
This agreement.
Can I before we get
Mhm.
onto the treaty, just want to just
Yeah.
stick on your name and the meaning, and those are powerful descriptors that you've provided to us. Okay. Do you believe you've lived up to your parents' aspirations for you?
Um, if their aspirations were informed from the very beginning by the name that they gave me, yes,
Yes.
I believe I am. I
Good for you.
am doing the best that I can in that regard, and by therefore encouraging the gift in me, which
Hmm.
is the legal side of who I
Yes.
am, and doing what I'm now doing for humanity, I do believe I did, and I still do, and will
Hmm.
maintain that till the very end,
Yes. Well
whenever
said.
that end will be.
It's a long time to
Because
come. A long time to come. I'm
absolutely.
affirming it's a long time to come.
Yeah,
There you are.
absolutely. I affirm that with you. And you see, my basic personal motto in saying
Yes.
that is be the best that you were created to be.
That's right.
Because
That's
I'm a
right.
genuine believer that the primary aim that I have to seek to pursue is
Hmm.
being the best that God created me to be. And
Yes.
by
Yes.
focusing on being the best, I don't waste time looking for faults in other people. If we
Indeed.
could all just but focus on being the best, in my being the
Absolutely.
best, I therefore put myself in a position where I help the next person to also be the
That's right.
best. But if
That's
I
right.
spend my time bashing other people, it means
That's
we'll
right.
all be bashing each other.
That's
So
right.
I would like to encourage all the viewers that
Mhm.
let's focus on being the best that we were created to be. And that's the best
That's
way
your
that we
motto.
can take
That's your
humanity
motto.
forward. That's my motto. That's my personal motto. Be the best
Okay, in
that you
that case,
were
hold
created
on.
to be.
You've said it. You've set the tone. Absolutely right. You've set the tone. Yeah. Let's be the best we can possibly be. I want to
Yeah.
now focus, if I may, Isabella. I want to now focus on this treaty
Yes, sir.
that was very recently approved. This month, in
Hmm.
fact, of May. Okay.
Yeah, just
Um,
this
uh,
past week.
yes,
Yeah.
yes, the past week indeed. So here we go. Can you describe the international? Forgive me. Why did most African nations agree to implement the World Health Organization 2025 pandemic treaty? Why did they agree to it? And I note, except for Egypt, it was unanimous amongst African countries. And except for Jamaica in the Caribbean, it was the only other non other African-led country that did not vote for it. But in both cases, they abstained. They didn't vote against it. They abstained, expressing
Yeah.
reservations. So why
Hmm.
did the, with the exception of Egypt, why did these African nations agree to implement the 2025 pandemic treaty?
My brother, that's a very difficult question to
Okay.
answer.
Sorry it's difficult. I'm sorry. Yeah.
Oh, no, no, no. It's important that such difficulties be put out there and be
Mhm,
problematized so that our
mhm.
people will begin to have a greater appreciation of what it is that we have to contend with.
Yeah.
Because, you see, the reason why I say it's a difficult question to answer is
Mhm,
because clearly the terms of the agreement, because you
mhm.
remember that initially when this thing was being touted, the
Yes.
World Health Organization was clearly calling it a pandemic preparedness treaty, and
Mhm,
then now they've pushed it through and replaced the word treaty with agreement so that it does not seem as heavy as what the initial intention was.
mhm.
I think one of the things that Africa finds itself in, unfortunately,
Okay.
there is this dependence mentality
Mhm,
whereby the African countries signing on to this agreement and supporting this agreement basically look at the fact that the African Union, for instance, who funds the African Union?
As of 2021, approximately 32% of the African Union budget was financed by member state contributions, while a whopping 65% came from external partners, including the European Union, individual European states, the World Bank, and private individual contributors.
Anything and everything that the American CDC says and does. And our African CDC is not self-funded either. So
It's not.
now
Okay.
it's
Okay.
not. So
Okay.
now you find that by virtue of the fact that the authorities who are supposed to be heading and running these entities are themselves compromised by the policies of other nations and other people, they therefore just follow. Look at what happened during the so-called COVID-19 pandemic,
Hmm.
where our governments, our CDC, were literally taking their cues, they were taking their direction from non-elected World Health Organization,
Hmm.
led by a supposed doctor who is not in actual fact a doctor. It's
Oh.
amazing how you
The current Director General of the World Health Organization, or WHO, is Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus, who is from Ethiopia. He is not a medical doctor. He holds a PhD in community health from the University of Nottingham in Britain and a master's degree of science and immunology of infectious diseases from the University of London. His expertise is in public health rather than clinical medicine.
can have a non-doctor heading an organization that speaks to the health of the world. And everyone seems to be okay with it. Everyone just
Mm-hmm.
accepts it. And
Mm-hmm.
our African governments find themselves highly compromised in this regard. And this is
Okay.
the reason why we now have
Okay.
to stand up in this particular regard and begin to problematize the role of the people in correcting the direction that the governments are setting us on, and
Right.
therefore begin to take responsibility for our own future. More
Yes.
particularly, my brother, if you were to issue out a questionnaire around the world right now and ask how many people even know who the representatives of their countries were at this gathering, you'll be amazed to find that 90, if not 99%, or 99.99999% of the world don't even know who these decision makers are. They don't even know how they got to be there and making
Mhm.
decisions for them. They never voted for them. They're
Okay.
just there taking decisions for us.
If I may, then, my brother, and I hear you.
Mhm,
I want to be a little fair to the bureaucrats and others who will be viewing this. And
mhm.
you know me, yep. I want to just
Yes.
be fair to them. Okay. Okay. And I just want to read a summary of aspects of the treaty very, very quickly for you.
Please
Okay.
do. Please do.
And 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 I just wanted, and I'm going to probe yourselves if this summary accurate. Okay, there we go.
Sure.
One of the key provisions include equitable access to health products. Now, it
Mhm,
says here that countries must ensure fair distribution on pandemic related health tools, like vaccines, for example.
mhm,
20% of the vaccines produced should be allocated to the World Health Organization for global public health needs. In other words, where you have countries with the manufacturing of vaccines,
mhm,
20% of their output should be given to the World Health Organization so they can support global public health needs. That's the first vision. Second one I see here, it's um, pathogen access and benefit sharing. They call it the PAB system. What it says here,
mhm,
nations agree to share genetic data of pathogens quickly and transparently. In return, they gain fair access to vaccine treatments, and diagnostic development from that data. In other words, you have someone with, let's say, an unusual strain of Ebola, let's say. You then take that pathogen and you share it with the World Health Organization, or indeed one of these big multinational pharmaceuticals. They will do the analysis. They will then share with you fair access to the vaccine produced to respond, the treatment protocols, diagnostics, and development from that data that is provided. That again seems quite reasonable. Let me continue, then you can respond. The third provision I see here, strengthen global coordination, which in the face of it seems quite reasonable. Countries commit to timely reporting and data sharing during health threats. The World Health Organization will act as the central hub for pandemic, and this is intelligence and coordination, which seems a reasonable role for the World Health Organization. Another provision, key provision I see here, support for low and middle income countries. High income nations must, he's used the words must, not shall, or sorry, could, or whatever. It says must. He could have said shall, but must assist low income countries with funding, supplies, and training. This includes building lab capacities and healthcare infrastructure. Again, it seems a perfectly reasonable provision. I've got two more I want to quickly read out.
Maybe
Pandemic.
my brother, let's do it this way. Sorry.
Okay.
The list is going longer. I might not
Okay.
remember
Okay.
some
I,
of the
I'm going to.
items. So maybe what we can do is maybe do two at a time.
Okay.
You do
Let's
two,
take
I
the first
respond to.
two. Let's take the first
Okay,
two,
so
equitable
the
access to health products and the pathogen access and benefit sharing system, or the PAB system. Yeah, respond to those two. Equitable access to health products, first of all. What's your
my
contention with that
brother,
provision?
my response will be
Mhm,
premised upon
mhm.
an African-centered perspective, in
Okay.
the sense
Ah.
that
Uh-huh.
what is
Forgive
being
me for
referred.
interrupting. Forgive me for interrupting.
Yes,
Yes, you're right.
yeah,
Maybe if let me ask that question in this way round, if I may.
yeah,
I note in your notes to me that you've used the term Ubuntu
yes.
principles.
Mhm.
Just clarify what you mean by Ubuntu principles, and then we'll return to these provisions, because that provides a useful context. What do you mean by Ubuntu principles? Please go ahead.
Well, basically, my brother, Ubuntu, the encapsulation of
Mhm.
Ubuntu, which in itself is a fundamental African imperative within
Okay.
the philosophy of Africans, is the aspect that I am because we are. We
Uh-huh.
are because I am.
I am.
Ubuntu.
I am because we are. We are because I am. Articulate a profound and relational worldview in which human identity, well-being, and destiny are deeply interwoven with that of the broader community, the natural environment, and spiritual realm. Ubuntu is not merely a cultural idiom. It is a comprehensive philosophical, ethical, and social framework that has guided African societies for centuries in understanding life, relationships, responsibility, and healing.
For
Yes.
the being that is Sabelo to be complete, Sabelo
Yes.
is only complete to the extent that Sabelo is functional within the community. For the
Yes.
community to be complete, the
Yes.
completeness of the family of the community is informed by my being part of the community. I am nothing without the community. The community is
Absolutely.
nothing without me. There is
Yes.
something missing. There is no longer the fullness of the community as long as there is an individual who is missing, or an individual who is no longer playing their role. But within
Right.
the context of healthcare, it is also
Uh-huh.
necessary to realize that it speaks to philosophical concept whereby we emphasize that individual pathology, and we look at a mechanistic treatment and that technologically driven interventions are not necessarily our answer. We teach that
Okay.
Ubuntu in the context of health speaks to more than just the absence of disease. It
Okay.
speaks to a state of total equilibrium, a harmonious alignment of the physical, the emotional, the communal, the environmental, and the spiritual. And this is one of the things that is missing from this document. This
Uh-huh.
agreement is words, words, and more words. There is no spirit that speaks to humanity within this document. There is no spiritual dimension of life in this document. There is no communality, in as much as the words that have been used would purport to give that impression. That is not what is intended. That is not the direction that this thing is going in. On the contrary, it is designed to ensure the total subjugation of indigenous communities, the total subjugation of natural healing, which is represented mainly in traditional healing and the naturopathic route. It is an attempt to impose allopathy on the whole world in the name of health. It is an attempt
If
to, and
could you
yes,
now
my
you?
brother.
I want to really focus on the first provision that we're responding to. That's the equitable access to health products.
Mhm.
What if the treaty does result in those countries where the pharmaceutical companies are manufacturing the vaccines, for example, okay, and those countries honor the treaty that if you produce 1,000 vaccines, 200 will be given over to the World Health Organization. What if that happens? Isn't that a good step? That's not a good outcome as a result of the treaty?
Maybe, my brother, what we would then
Okay.
have to think around first
Okay.
is when we talk about a vaccine,
Mhm.
what exactly is it that we are talking about? Because what has basically happened is that the whole idea of what is called a vaccine is in actual fact not the traditional vaccine that we're talking to here. And when they're talking about the equitable access to vaccines, they are not talking about the traditionally defined vaccine, which spoke to a weakened pathogen, which spoke to an attenuated pathogen. This is now talking about artificial substances and the necessity for the World Health Organization during the so-called pandemic to redefine vaccine was so that they can introduce poisons into people's lives. So
Okay.
now,
Can I
if
can I
what we are told,
hold on before you do that? This is what I was trying to want to avoid that. Why?
Mhm,
Why? Because with the exception of Egypt, which simply abstained,
yes,
all countries have signed up to this. Okay. So I'm
mhm,
not going to, if I may, enjoy with you the idea that poison is being distributed, but I would enjoy with you that the traditional practices, which clearly is what 80% of the African population, continental African population relies upon, is the World Health Organization, or WHO, acknowledges that approximately 80% of Africans rely on traditional medicine for their primary health needs. Signed up to this, okay? So I'm
mhm.
not going to, if I may, enjoy with you the idea that poison is being distributed, but I would enjoy with you that the traditional practices, which clearly is what 80% of the African population, continental African population relies upon, It's clearly
Yeah.
worked because the last pandemic didn't result in mass killings as occurred in the United States, for example, or countries such as that. Okay, it didn't result in clearly the traditional African traditional medicines worked. Okay, so I don't want to. You said at the beginning we don't want to criticize everyone. Okay. So we can talk to our strengths. Okay, but the principle, nevertheless, if the treaty results in 20% of the world output of vaccines, however they're made, is shared with the rest of the world, okay, via the World Health Organization, I don't think you and I are disagreeing that's a positive provision. What we're questioning is the quality and the efficacy of the vaccines. Okay, and I think that's a reasonable discussion. I nor you yourself are able to comment on the efficacy at this stage unless we had medical training. Okay, I'd like to have doctors in the room. I'd like to have doctors in the room to have that discussion. So I'm not going to pursue it. But I want
No,
to
I'm
take you
with
on
you.
to. Thank you. I want to take you on to the other provision, the second provision, if I may. This conscious of
Mhm.
time, so we need to keep it moving. The pathogen access and benefit sharing, or PAB systems. This is
Yeah.
where nations agree to share genetic data of pathogens quickly and transparently. In return, they gain fair access to vaccine treatment protocols, diagnostic development from that data produced from the pathogen shared. Okay, that appears on the face of it to be helpful, isn't it?
I'm glad that you premised it by saying on the face of it, because in real terms, my brother, what
Okay.
this is doing, again, I will look at it from the African viewpoint.
Yes.
Let's look at what happened during the so-called COVID, particularly with Omicron, which was supposedly discovered in South Africa and Botswana,
Ah,
who
yes. Yes.
quickly shared it with the World Health Organization and who ran with it. And when the benefits were being ripped from that particular pathogen, the two countries didn't get anything. So
Oh.
now, the most critical thing, my brother, this is an attempt to basically take advantage of traditional healing. This is an attempt to take advantage of natural medication. It has nothing to do with general benefits. This is, again, another way of ensuring that the pharmaceutical companies benefit from medication that they don't know anything about. So now,
Okay. Can I just ask you to
mhm,
hold there? Hold there. Okay.
yeah,
I've heard the
mhm,
statement. I'm going to
yes,
read it. I'm going to read this provision again.
yeah,
Because remember, we've got a wide audience here. I want to make sure
hmm,
we talk to the provision as it's actually written into the treaty. And
please
just
do.
for the benefit of the audience here, I've read the treaty now on 5 times over the past 24 hours. Okay, just to ensure
That
I'm able
is
to
good.
speak with a necessity.
Mm,
Just to ensure I'm able to have this conversation with Sabella. There we go. And I will
yeah,
repeat. It says here,
mhm,
nations agree to share genetic data of pathogens quickly and transparently. Okay. In return, they gain fair access to vaccine treatment protocols, diagnostic developments from that data. Okay. So, in other words, there's information sharing. What I think you're saying, based upon the most recent experience in COVID-19, when the Omicron was produced by South Africa, in fact, you did not receive that benefit. Yep, as laid out in this provision. Although this treaty didn't exist then, maybe if the treaty had existed, you would have received the benefit. South Africans en masse would have received the benefit. Would that be a reasonable conclusion of what you're describing?
well, depending on what benefit is. If
Okay.
benefit
What?
means getting vaccines, so called, then that is not a benefit. That is a step backwards because it's actually taking us away from our own natural ways of healing and
Okay.
relying on allopathy. Because what we should be talking to is the necessity to ensure that traditional medication, that natural medication, does not play second fiddle to allopathy. What
Okay.
this supposed treaty is actually doing in this the pubs that you've just read just now is
Yes.
actually consolidating the medical knowledge. It's actually getting people to run around looking for so-called pathogens which
Hmm.
have potential to cause pandemics. In actual fact, it would be more correct. There is a gentleman by the name of James Roguski, who, they talk to it and say that they are looking for pathogens with pandemic potential. But
Yes.
James properly puts it when he says pathogens with pandemic profiteering potential. Because
Hmm.
here, what is
Hmm.
basically happening is that we're looking to nature and we're saying, let's identify those aspects in nature that can be modified and therefore become problematic in the future to cause a pandemic. If this
Hmm.
thing has been in existence for the past millions of years or however long, why should we now be looking for it and sending it to the World Health Organization to send it to Pharmacia so that they can then determine that this has a potential to cause a pandemic and therefore I want to benefit from that? So it's basically putting profits over people. Then we want to start looking to nature for things that we can adulterate so that we can make money while someone else is making more money out of that particular process.
If I
And
may
we
then
will,
at this point,
rather.
if I may at this point, because what you I think
Mhm.
you're saying is that the natural herbs, plants to use as part of the traditional African medicines regimes, okay, um, possess active ingredients, and it's those active ingredients that potentially are patented by the pharmaceutical companies, on which they're then able to claim intellectual rights over, which is the basis of them making money. Okay, I
Yes, that
suppose
is
it,
the one aspect. That
that's
is
right.
the one aspect
That's right.
whereby
Hmm.
the knowledge
Hmm.
that is known locally, the
Yes.
locally available remedies, the locally
Yes.
available medicines are
Yes.
then twerked and synthesized.
That's
And
right.
then once they've been synthesized, someone claims an intellectual property over something that God gave us. And
Yes.
we take it that copyright, for instance, from our
Hmm.
African perspective, is the right to
Yes.
copy, which basically means that knowledge is common and knowledge is
Yes.
there to be shared. You can say
Yes.
something now and it resonates with me. I have a right to copy that thought and develop it
Hmm.
without claiming ownership because it
Yes.
belongs
Yes.
to the community. It
Okay.
benefits the community.
Okay.
It's for everyone. And the
Okay.
fact that as we speak right now, are you aware that this document that was supposedly adopted is actually incomplete? And the most critical part of it is this annex on the PABS.
Hmm.
There is an intergovernmental body that has been set up, which will sit, I think, for the first time in July, to come up with the terms of how the PABS is going to be
Okay.
implemented. How do you sign and how do you adopt an agreement, whereas the core fundamental of its implementation is yet to
Hmm.
be negotiated after adoption? This
Okay.
is an attempt to basically ensure that they sneak in things that will now regulate the manner in which so-called pathogens are treated and shared, and how the pharmaceuticals are going to continue to benefit at the expense of traditional medicine, at the expense of the naturopaths, and ensure that by 2025, the whole idea is that by the 79th World Health Assembly, the PABS must be finalized. The annex must be
Okay. Right.
finalized and therefore make part of the agreement. And again, what it's going to do, which we've already seen with the negotiation, is that there's no public participation. Where
Mm-hmm.
are the people? Why are we
Mm-hmm.
not allowed to make an input? Why
Uh-huh.
are the traditional healers not being invited to make an input?
Mm-hmm.
Why are the
Mm-hmm.
naturopaths not being
Yes.
invited to make an input? Because
Mm-hmm.
it is known that as soon as that knowledge is made public and that knowledge is incorporated into this document, it will kill the impact of the benefits and the profits that the pharmaceuticals are playing.
Okay.
Basically, what we
Ask
are
you.
dealing with here
Yes.
is the World Health
Okay.
Organization
Mhm.
positioning itself as the drug dealer of note.
Can I ask you just to pause right there? And
Yes, sir.
that's an interesting point to end in that interesting one, because the third provision, key provision, is to
Mhm.
strengthen the global coordination. Countries commit to timely reporting, data sharing during health threat. The World Health Organization will act as the central hub for pandemic intelligence and coordination. Okay, as I
Why
say.
is that necessary? Well, why
Oh.
is that necessary? If we have an issue in any country, let that country work things out and determine for itself what is best for itself. Because
Mm.
now, you see, during the so-called COVID pandemic, one of
Mhm.
the things that was happening when African countries were submitting their reports,
Mhm.
they were being dismissed as fictitious because they
Oh.
were lower than the projection. You
Ah,
remember that
right.
when
Yes,
this
I
thing
do
was
recall.
announced,
I
there was a
recall. Yes.
projection that within the first 6 months, no less than 300,000 Africans would have died. And it never
Yes.
happened for the
No, it didn't
duration of the
happen.
whole thing. Say,
Indeed.
supposing the reporting was fictitious, as was alleged, that we were not giving out the full data. We would have seen it because we would have been burying people left, right, and center, and we were
That's right.
not. We were even
Leave that
told
there.
that
Leave that there.
hospitals.
If I may. If I may.
Sure.
The point has been made. The point has been made. As I said earlier on, 80% of the population relies upon traditional African medicine regimes, and it was clearly
Yes.
obvious that the population is growing, is thriving. Despite the pandemic. Unlike places in Britain where the population is actually declining, and unlike in the US, it's actually the core population is declining. Unlike in Japan, where the core population is declining. Unlike in India and China, where the core population is declining. In Africa, the population is increasing, which implies that the traditional African medicine regime works. So let me move on. Let me move on to the next one. It's okay. This conscious of time, we won't get a lot into this interview, and there's much more to be said. Okay. Now, the next provision is that the support low and middle income countries, African countries essentially, but anyway, um,
Mhm.
high income countries, which essentially mean Western countries such as Britain, America, Germany, France, and so on, indeed China, must assist low income countries with funding, the supplies and training, and this includes building lab capacities and healthcare infrastructure. Again, on the face of it, that seems perfectly reasonable if you've got enough wealth and you can support those who don't have that wealth and that capacity to help them to build the labs, to build the healthcare infrastructure. That seems perfectly reasonable, isn't it?
My brother,
Okay.
maybe let me premise my response with a
Yes,
question.
of course.
If you are starving
Mm.
and I come to you and say I'm helping you,
Mhm.
and I'm stuffing you with fast foods left, right, and center, will I be doing you any good?
No.
Absolutely. So the issue here is that the things that they say they want to support us with is synthetic medication. They are not helping us to develop our own traditional herbs
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
medicines. They are not
Yes.
helping us to research, if at all there is need for research, on our naturopathic medications. What they are saying is the support that they are talking about is flooding our health markets with their pharmaceutical drugs. And as far as
Mm-hmm.
I'm concerned, that is not help. We would rather find our own ways of developing our own medication,
Mm-hmm.
see how
Mm-hmm.
the parts and the traditional healers can work together and come
Mm-hmm.
up with protocols that are going to help us. We
Yes.
don't need that kind of assistance, my brother. And that's one of the reasons why Africa has to reject this thing. And the adoption, thankfully, does not mean that it has been implemented. As you rightly put it, that 60 countries have to ratify. And
Mm-hmm.
we have the ability as African countries to get ourselves out of this thing. We don't
Okay.
have to be bound because at the moment, all that is there is a principled position. It is
That's right.
not the treaty. It is not the agreement. We still have time to rescue humanity out of this thing. So, definitely, my brother, that provision should be properly interpreted within the context of the nature of the help.
Mm-hmm.
Helping me to die is not helping me. Helping me to live is helping me.
Thank you. Again, the point is well made. This is fine. It is well. It is well. I know the audience will resonate with the audience because it's
Mhm.
perfectly reasonable. The next provision, pandemic preparedness reviews. Nations
Yes.
must regularly evaluate and report their readiness for pandemics. Peer review mechanisms will assess progress and guide improvements. That seemed a perfectly reasonable collective approach to ensure that your nation, our nations, are prepared to withstand the next pandemic. Isn't it? That's a reasonable provision, isn't it?
When is the next pandemic?
Oh, we're prepared for if it comes.
When was the last pandemic?
Oh, okay. Uh, uh, you answer your own question. You tell us.
Okay, I'll tell you that, my brother, a lot of people think COVID was a pandemic. A lot of people think H1N1 was a pandemic.
Clarify,
Those,
please. Yes, please
oh,
clarify.
absolutely, absolutely. 2009, when is it Miss Chan was heading the World Health Organization, that's when
Hmm.
they redefined the pandemic in real
Explain.
terms. In
Explain what you
real
mean. Explain.
terms,
Explain
yes.
what you mean. Yeah.
In real terms, the traditional meaning of pandemic spoke to the extent of death and severity of illness of
Hmm.
people, therefore qualifying it as a pandemic. But then now, when they changed the definition, they simply said it's determined by the spread of a virus. So now you can simply say, okay, we say now there is a virus and this virus is in 10 countries. This is a pandemic. Regardless of the severity of whatever it is that they are calling a virus, if indeed it is a virus, because there is a debate going on right now about whether viruses exist or do not exist. I will not go into that because
Hmm.
I'm not qualified to speak to that
Hmm.
particular aspect. I've read a lot about it, but there is a lot that I still don't understand from a medical and a scientific perspective. So now the thing is, are they
Hmm.
talking about what they will plant and then tell us that there is a virus that is going on and it's all over the world, it's in this country and that country or whatever? Or are they talking about the traditional meaning of a pandemic? Because the beauty that they basically enjoy is that they have the power to define. They have the power to decide what is and what isn't without necessarily taking humanity into that particular equation or that
Okay.
particular aspect, so
Hmm.
that now they are the ones who quickly say, now this is a pandemic, or this is not a pandemic, or something like
Okay,
that. I'm trying to get
forgive me.
better light still.
It's okay. It's okay. Can I just ask you
Mm,
again? Let's quite slowly to
mhm,
provide the definition of a pandemic prior to the change. Just say it slowly so we've understood it. But I'm as you're speaking, looking up the references, and I'm seeing, just so you know, a
mhm,
widespread occurrence of an infectious disease over a whole country or the world at a particular time.
mhm,
That's what I see the references are implying. Or
mhm,
another reference says a pandemic is when a new disease or new strain of an existing disease spreads worldwide. Um, now, that is clear to me, and it accords with my both empirical and academic understanding of the term pandemic. What do you
mhm.
mean by pandemic? That is a variant from those two descriptors I've just read out.
Well, basically, what I mean is that the traditional manner in which a pandemic was determined was not necessarily by saying it has spread to this place and spread to that place, this particular condition that we are talking to. It's actually about the death that is being recorded as a result of a
Okay.
particular condition. It is about the severity of the um,
Mortality rate. You're saying the
yeah,
mortality rate is
the
what defines
mortality rate, it's
what
the
percentage?
severity of the condition as well.
Yes. Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Um.
So for
I,
that
I, I,
for that
I,
reason, therefore,
mhm.
for that reason, therefore,
Yeah.
it is
Yeah.
clear that we have to be circumspect in
Right.
what we are talking to when we talk about a pandemic. So now you find that like I said to you earlier, that the background to the change dates back to 2009,
Yes.
whereby initially the definition spoke about a widespread geographic spread, severe illness, and high
Hmm.
mortality. And
Hmm.
then the revised version talks about a new virus, talks about human to human transmission and
Yes.
worldwide spread. But then
Yes.
now we are no longer talking about mortality. So if we allow a situation where there is fluidity of definition of issues, we will find ourselves consistently changing to the whim of how the World Health Organization wants us to direct our lives, and
Hmm.
at the expense of people's sovereignty, at the expense of national sovereignties, and at the promotion of the interests of the pharmaceutical industries, which in themselves are benefiting from these redefinitions. Because even in 2009, as soon as the definition changed, the pharmaceutical companies were ready with the vaccines.
Okay. Can I just ask you to pause there? That's fine because you've made the point.
Mhm,
And
mhm,
after this show, again, you'll provide some additional references, which will be included in the re-edited version of this interview. The
absolutely.
re-edited version will have far more information, so watch the space. The last provision I just want to refer to, if I may, then we'll look at
Mhm,
your top 5 recommendations. So the last provision we'd look at is the legal and ethical commitment. Countries agree to uphold human rights during public health emergencies. Measures like lockdown and surveillance must be proportionate and lawful. That seems perfectly reasonable, isn't it? How a country responds to a health emergency being regulated, so it must be proportionate and lawful. In other words, respect one's human rights. That seems a perfectly reasonable provision. I think you could agree with that one, can you not?
that implies that lockdowns are human rights issues, in the sense that, for me, the whole concept, the whole idea behind locking down people is a human rights violation. More particularly, that the whole process of locking down people impacts their immune systems. it weakens the immune system of an individual. A person cannot stay under house arrest simply because we've been told that there is a medical condition. More so within the context of Africa again, where we have our own traditional healing systems, where we have our own naturopathic healing systems. Why should we be locked down when we have the ability to heal? When we have the wherewithal to heal ourselves? So that in itself becomes a human rights violation.
Can
So
I ask you to pause there? It's fine. You made the point, and we said earlier on, clearly, the traditional African medicine regime worked because there wasn't lockdown in Africa. Okay, okay, and the
well,
population
some
is
countries
thriving.
like South Africa did try.
They try. I know they try, but it didn't work either. But it was very clear. It's very clear that there is some contradiction here in these wordings, and the nation states will have to review those wordings before they incorporate it into their national laws. What I want to now, if I may, in the sort of closing minutes, is to look at your top 5 recommendations to protect African sovereignty, traditional and naturopathic medicines, and indigenous knowledge. What are your top 5 recommendations, Isabella? What would you recommend?
Well, basically, my recommendations are twofold in the sense that my primary recommendation
Yes.
is for Africa not to even sign on to this thing, for Africa
Okay.
not to give recognition to this thing, because we can have our own African centered document if we feel that we need one that does not impose allopathy on African people, that does not impose World Health Organization standards of health on African people. And the important thing is that, in as much as I say African people, this speaks to humanity as a whole. It
Indeed.
speaks
Indeed.
to everyone in the world who basically regards themselves as a sovereign being. This treaty, so called, this agreement, so called, is not necessary.
Okay.
But
All right.
in the event that Africa, in its lack of wisdom, decides that it wants to go ahead with this particular issue, Africa will have to ensure that the dignity, autonomy, and contributions to health are informed by the recognition, a clear and qualified recognition of naturopathic and African traditional medicine, with the people having the right to elect as to a medical regime that they want to be regulated by. If they want to take the allopathic route, let it be their choice. If they want to take the African traditional route, the naturopathic route,
Should be given
let it be.
choice.
They
Okay.
can have that. Secondly, it
Okay.
has to be clear that there is an institutionalization of indigenous and community participation. No decisions should be taken about our health without our African traditional healers, our
Mm-hmm.
naturopaths, the
Mm-hmm.
African people in general, the indigenous
Yes.
knowledge holders being part of the decision making process. As we speak right now, it would be interesting to know how many of those people who took this decision in the name of the African countries actually consulted with any of the people that I am talking to now. And I bet you the answer is zero. So
Yes.
now
Okay.
we have to also ensure, again, emphasize that these recommendations are only if Africa feels that it has to sign up on this. Because what happened with the adoption, as far as I'm concerned, is a treasonous betrayal of the African people, the treasonous betrayal of the aspirations of African people regarding a future that protects their well being. So now I would say establish a robust legal protection against biopiracy and harmful research practices. the
Yes.
PABS that you were speaking to earlier. One of
Mhm.
the reasons why they're looking at this sharing, so-called, of pathogens is so that they can practice gain-of-function research, where they take an innocent, naturally occurring, I don't know, pathogen, if you call it that, or
Mhm.
just some naturally occurring creation of God,
Yes. Yes.
and then they go and weaponize it, make it lethal, see
Mhm.
how it would harm a human
Uh,
being, and
Forgive
then
me,
release it.
hold on, if I may, we're not
Please do.
suggesting we are not suggesting that either nation states or companies are weaponizing our pathogens in order to destroy humanity. I did want to emphasize that you're not actually suggesting that. Okay, I'm not suggesting that. We should not suggest that because you're not able to present evidence that that is indeed the case. Okay,
I'm
so
not, my
okay,
brother,
I want to be
I'm not
careful because we're in
suggesting.
public. This is
Let,
very much a public
let me
statement.
just
So yeah, go ahead.
let me just put that clearly.
Thank you.
I'm not suggesting anything in that regard. Manner in which the gain of function research has been done has
Mhm.
been to take these innocent, naturally occurring, I don't know, pathogens or whatever you
I
want to
understand. I
call
understand
them,
what you're saying. Yep, I understand what you're
and
saying. Mm.
weaponize them, because this is what has even come out. There is documentary evidence that has come out
Can I
that
just
even the
forgive me?
so-called COVID-19
Oh,
was
hold
weaponized.
on, hold on,
And
somebody. I hear you. I hear you. In this part of the paper you supplied to me, you refer
yes,
to this. You said, while the so-called treaty proposed to the establishment of the PAB systems, okay, its provisions lay ground for the promotion of gain of function research, which you just spoke to.
yes.
This exposes African nations and indigenous communities to the risk of biopiracy, okay, where
Hmm.
biological samples and traditional knowledge are used for commercial or scientific gain without fair compensation or consent. So the absence of legal safeguards undermines trust and fails to uphold the principle of justice and reciprocity. Now that was a perfectly reasonable riposte to that provision. What you're going on to at the moment is outside of the provision of this particular interview, because we don't have the authoritative evidence of the type of weaponization that you're describing, and I don't want to go there. Okay, I don't want to go there, and it kind of without evidence, I would ask for the absolute evidence that we can scrutinize, and we need to do that separately. Can I just ask
No,
you
that's fine.
in
Maybe we can do another show one day where we're just
separately?
looking at the evidence.
Absolutely, absolutely. Can I just ask you in terms of recommendation about the cultural and spiritual autonomy? And I'm just going to read what you say is absent from the
Please
treaty, and
do.
you've alluded to it. So I did want to read it, and this is not the reason why I have you here. Because when I read this
Mhm.
was sound, very level-headed thinking. The cultural and spiritual autonomy is absent, and you've said it on a number of occasions, and you say here, the treaty does not account for the cultural and spiritual dimension of health that are vital to many African communities. By ignoring these aspects, it risks introducing so-called pandemic measures that are illegitimate, culturally inappropriate, or even harmful. This is not only undermine the effectiveness of public health responses, but also violates the rights of African communities to health systems that reflect their values. Traditions
Mhm.
and worldview is totally disregards thus undermines the principles of Ubuntu. And I get that. That makes, again, when I read that, that was perfectly reasonable. It made perfect sense, and I agreed it is absent. But the other recommendation you made, I thought was really important. the participation of indigenous peoples and African institutions, which again you've inferred here, it being excluded,
Yeah.
which you've just spoken to. The drafting
Mhm.
process has not consulted or included representatives from indigenous groups and traditional knowledge custodians. This exclusion creates a significant democratic deficit in the treaty formulation and has deliberately silenced the very voices most affected by the proposed global health policies. It reflects a governance imbalance that must be resisted, as the proposed treaty is not equitable and not legitimate. Now, again, I read that. That is absolutely spot on, and you've inferred around that recommendation in your in the dialogue here. And the last one you've noted here is the participation of naturopaths. Okay, it was excluded. Now, if we read what you wrote again, made perfect sense. The drafting process has not included naturopaths. And by that we mean, of course, those are the traditional knowledge holders, those who apply that knowledge and are responsible for the fact that 80% of the population across the continent relies upon these people, and it's quite evident that they were successfully fighting off the so-called, I would say, COVID-19 pandemic. Okay, so clearly they are effective. So let me go on. The drafting process has not included naturopaths, which created a significant democratic and medical deficit. Despite the importance of naturopaths to health systems, the voice of naturopaths has been silenced and excluded. It reflects a governance imbalance that must be resisted, as the proposed treaty is not equitable and illegitimate. So that made
Absolutely.
perfect sense. Absolutely makes perfect sense. Okay, that makes perfect sense. And I hope those who are leaders across the continent, indeed across the world, take note of these recommendations, because they are well thought through, level-headed recommendations, which speaks to a nation's ability, particularly nations that have existed, the people that existed for hundreds of thousands of years, and has clearly been exposed to many maladies, whether it be a virus or bacteria, and been able successfully to resist and thrive in that environment. And COVID-19 would but a more recent example of the resilience that is within the natural path, the people, that intimate knowledge of nature, and to use nature to boost our immune response and defend ourselves against those viruses and bacteria that might affect our health. So it is you're quite right. We need to value that knowledge and not exclude it. I 100% agree with you.
Absolutely.
That's that's why.
And whatever
Mhm,
treaty, so
mhm,
called, that
mhm,
we are to sign on to, if we sign on to it, is illegitimate and irrelevant to the African people and the
mhm,
generality of humanity that
mhm.
does not subscribe to allopathy. And as long
Yes,
as those voices are excluded, then it goes back to the issue that you spoke to earlier about
mhm,
human rights. What
yes,
about the rights of those people who want to ensure that they are also given expression in a document like this? Because
absolutely.
it's subject to abuse.
Yes, yes, 100%, 100% correct. And we've seen examples of it on many occasions with other institutions. There's no doubt
Yeah.
about that. So I've got, again, it's all logical. It makes perfect sense. The African leaders, indeed leaders worldwide, need to think of their own local provisions. Consider how it is that the natural paths, your local natural paths, have been able to defend the communities, and how can we find a balance? And I was asserting we need to find a balance between the natural path and the scientific approach, which is currently being popularized through the World Health Organization. We need to find a balance that respects our cultural sovereignty, our national sovereignty, our clinical, indeed, our traditional medicine sovereignty. That I believe is the needle and thread that we're trying to resolve, and that
That
requires
is
a
true,
much
my
broader
brother.
discussion. Of course,
Mm.
of course, yep.
Yeah, definitely.
Mhm,
Provided as well that
mhm,
when we talk about science, we
mhm,
don't run the risk of what we have seen happening, where science ends up being treated as though it was a religion. where once science has spoken, no one is allowed to question, no one is allowed to debate any further. So this also speaks to the necessity to ensure that there is no abuse of science. If science has
Absolutely.
to be used, then science must be used for the benefit of humanity, with everyone who classifies themselves as a scientist having the right and the ability to challenge what their peers have said, not to be cancelled simply because you have a different viewpoint from what your peers have said.
Absolutely right. And just reminded the audience again of the Ubuntu, the African Ubuntu affirmation, affirmed the inherent value of African peoples, affirmed the inherent sovereignty of African nations and African peoples, affirmed the value and prioritization of African health systems, ensures self-determination in health governance, and restores balance and fairness in international cooperation, which is what you're speaking to now.
Absolutely.
Absolutely right. Spot
Yeah.
on. Now,
Yeah.
and you go on to say this is not only a matter of health policy, but one of justice and cultural integrity and the right of African people to defend their own futures without having to kneel to anyone or entity. Praise Jah, Rastafari. Yes, absolutely. Who can argue with
Yeah.
that? I can't argue with that. You may want to
No,
expect.
absolutely. That is
We only now have 2 more minutes. 2 more minutes. Okay. I'm confident, based upon the messages I'm receiving, who I've not read out, but I don't have time on this occasion to read out. But we get you back again. Don't you worry. How can those who want to reach out to you? What's the best method for them to reach out to you to continue this dialogue? What would you recommend?
well. They can reach out on the email address
Okay.
info at loctivismalliance.org. Alternatively, they can send a WhatsApp message on +27
We won't give out that phone
73.
number on the air. Forgive me, we won't get that phone number on the air. I will include it as part of the commentary within the YouTube channel, if I may, just for
Okay, excellent.
security
Yeah, no,
purposes. Yep. Okay.
I'm happy with that. Yeah, so
Thank you.
that
Thank you.
is how basically I'm reachable. And one of my primary messages as well is
Yes.
that the whole thrust of what we are doing is that
Yes.
we do accept that there are some people within the realm of politics who
Hmm.
mean well and are
Yes.
working for the communities. We are here to stand with you and to support you to ensure
Absolutely.
that humanity is protected, to ensure
Absolutely.
that we address those aspects that speak to the advancement of who we are as humans.
Well said. Well said. That's a
Mhm.
good note to conclude on. We're definitely going to have you back again because there was a number of outstanding issues here. But you provided,
Absolutely.
but you provided real insights. We now hope that the countries across the continent and the peoples across the continent will have that local dialogue. What this treaty means for this nation state in the context of Ubuntu, which is an affirmation across the continent. It's not unusual. It is clear that we must ensure
Absolutely.
an
Absolutely.
African-centric approach to signing up to this treaty. If, as you say, we should sign up at all, but I just want to keep it clear: 60 countries make it international law, which might present some challenges. Okay, but I'm assuring you, here in Britain, where I'm based, that dialogue has not happened. It's not happened. Okay,
No,
and
it hasn't. It
indeed.
hasn't happened anywhere.
Indeed. So therefore, this
Yeah.
dialogue, I know, will stimulate many dialogues across the globe. Okay, be assured, be assured. So Bella, I want to thank you
Yeah.
for being a truly inspirational guest. You've most certainly stimulated the attention of many, and you've both raised a concern, but also you've also given a clear affirmation of our strength as ordinary people to influence these key decision makers so they operate in the collective, the people's interest, and not the small elite or corporate interest. For that, I applaud you.
Absolutely.
Sabelo Sibanda, the People's Law Service, founder of the International Alliance of Law Service. Email address info@lawservicealliance.org. It's the motivator here. Hope you enjoyed that fantastic podcast. Don't forget to subscribe, or at the very least, give us a like. And don't forget the next video on screen. Click through and enjoy.